So welcome to our On One Foot Jewish Faculty Lecture Series. I'm Sophie Block, the director of Hillel. I think I recognize most of the names in the waiting room and in the call. And this lecture series features a different Jewish faculty member, from our local universities every other week to spotlight the incredible Jewish intellectual talent we have here in Memphis for the entire community to enjoy. And this week's lecturer is Professor Etty Terem, who's the Associate Professor of History and Chair of History at Rhodes College, and the Program Chair of JIMES, Jewish, Islamic, and Middle Eastern Studies. And she's going to talk about her latest research and also talk about JIMES, which is a landmark historic program at Rhodes College. So I'm really excited for us to dive in. And with that, I will officially pass the mic over to Professor Terem.
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I'm the chair of JIMES, the Jewish, Islamic, and Middle East Studies program. I am not the chair of the history department, not yet, not yet at least, but I'm thank you, Sophie, for inviting me, and thank you for this initiative, reaching out to Rhodes students and University of Memphis students and the community at large. I'm delighted to be here, and what I'm planning to do is to talk for maybe 20 minutes about my research, and so this is a formal kind of talk about my research interests, about my attempts at innovation and debunking some problematic assumptions in the field, in my field of study. And then in the Q&A, we can talk about basically everything, about my research, about teaching at Rhodes, maybe about JIMES, if you guys interested. So let's start with my research interests. I named the lecture Islamic Revival and Reform in Colonial Morocco. It would be a little bit more than Islamic Revival and Reform in Colonial Morocco. I want you to understand where I'm coming from and how I do what I do. So it's a little bit more than that, but let's start and see where it takes us. Can you all see my my slides? Yeah, all righty. Yeah. So I'm starting with my research agenda, and it derives from a series of critical questions in Islamic studies. And these are the research questions that shape my research, that shape my study. Number one, what is the meaning of modernity in the Muslim world? Number two, what is the concrete content of the changes that occurred during the modern period in the Muslim world? Number three, how do Muslims think about these transformations shaped by modernity? In particular, I am interested in Islamic ideologies of renewal, of revival, and reform. This is in a big way my agenda. So it doesn't matter what I teach and where or what period of time I do my research and write my articles or publish my books. This is what I'm interested in. So everything falls under this umbrella. Modern Islamic thought is rarely explored from the perspective of its own intellectual tradition and its internal arguments. Instead, it is examined through the European experience of modernity. The modern is defined in terms of Western values and Western ideals, and even the Western past. Okay, so throughout my career, I have approached modern Islam on its own terms, interrogating Islamic texts, Islamic arguments, and Islamic methodologies in order to comprehend the material transformations, the ideological shifts, and the new identities that emerged in the modern Muslim world. My study uses the case of 20th century Morocco to challenge dominant assumptions that conceptualize the development of innovation, change, reformist thought, and modern consciousness in Muslim societies in a unidirectional way, meaning assumptions that adopt an essentialist analytical framework that centered on European domination and Islamic reactions. Okay, so I would argue that after you understand the agenda or my research agenda in general and the questions that drive my agenda, the goal of my research is to question these assumptions of European domination and Islamic reactions. Okay, and I would argue that these assumptions shape in a very big way the existing scholarship. Let's see what exactly this essentialist paradigm argues. So according to this essentialist paradigm, a very Eurocentric paradigm, obviously, Orientalist or Orientalist scholarship maintained that Islamic culture and society had suffered from stagnation and decline since the mid-16th century. Eventually, the hegemonic expansion of Europe into the Middle East from the 18th century onwards resulted in ideological, social, and economic transformations through imitation, through adoption of European concepts, European institutions, European thoughts and ideas. Muslim governments, power elites, and intelligentsia formulated new identities and initiated social progress by instituting modern cultural and political reforms. Again, this is the essentialist paradigm from the perspective of Orientalist scholarship. But these are not the only, this is not the only scholarship that I'm trying to debunk or trying to question. At the same time, post-independence and anti-colonial nationalists or nationalist historiography offered a sustained critique of the colonial project with a consequent emphasis on the opposition to colonialism and nationalism, responding to colonial historiography and to Orientalism. Nationalist historical writings were preoccupied with disputing the objectives and consequences of colonial rule and with underscoring nationalist resistance. The colonial period was seen as a contaminated time, a mistake. Reformers were evaluated in terms of their contribution to anti-colonial resistance. Their cultural, intellectual initiatives were posited as the authentic representation of the indigenous community. Okay, so as you understand now, at least two very important scholarships or styles of writing and styles of studying the history and writing history, Orientalists and nationalists, are really positioning themselves within this essentialist paradigm. These two discourses commonly consider the emergence of modern forms and modern government and modern economy and the modern identity within Middle Eastern societies as a response to European military and technological superiority. Furthermore, they share the belief that modernity and its institutions originated from Europe and spread to the Muslim world through the imposition of universal values and imitation of projects of reform or resistance to repressive foreign domination. I hope that you start to understand my problems with these kind of attitudes, okay? So again, I call it the essentialist paradigm. It's a Eurocentric paradigm. And in a second, I will start to unfold and unpack the problems. I mean, I hope that by now you understand at least some of the problems with these paradigms. So what are the claims that these styles of writing are making? Accordingly, one of the principal claims of the Orientalist scholarship is that far from achieving a supposedly rational, secular, and liberal Western modernity, the Muslim world developed an inferior, deficient copy of Western modernity, which is rooted in despotic practices and theocratic regimes. In the nationalist historiography, the rise of modernity is told as a story of an ongoing struggle to emancipate the authentic nation through the appropriation of ideas of colonial progress and modernity. My research on the development of modern thought and modern consciousness in the Middle East and North Africa, and specifically in Morocco, has called into question the belief that local modernization efforts were a simple response to European hegemony. Are you all with me? Yeah? All righty. I demonstrate that the modern transformations of state and society were the result of complex relations between societies and cultures. Modernity and its institutions neither spread ready-made from Europe to the East, nor were they imposed on passive others, nor were they mere a defensive mechanism against European power. Instead, they were fashioned and constructed through complex processes of translation, of appropriation, negotiation, in which both sides of the colonial encounter participated. Specifically, I have chosen to base my investigation of modern reformist Islam in Morocco and in the Middle East in general in the study of fatwas, legal opinions issued by muftis or by religious scholars, religious experts. Fatwas emerge from below. The mufti issues a fatwa in response to questions and in response to demands for Islamic answers to everyday problems. The request for a fatwa often reveals the existence of a social conflict or a religious dispute, which prompted the appeal to the mufti. Okay, so fatwas are, in a way, I want you to think about the rabbinic genre of questions and answers. It is this kind of genre, but in the Islamic tradition, coming from Sharia law or Islamic law. So the idea behind me choosing fatwas and muftis as the lens through which I penetrate I do my research and I penetrate the Middle East is the idea that fatwas or these legal opinions bring Islamic legal knowledge into mundane issues, into the world, into everyday life, and the world is connected into Islamic knowledge and legal knowledge, okay? That's, in my opinion, the power, okay, the fascination, my fascination, that explains my fascination with fatwas, my fascination or my choice of doing this kind of work with fatwas. So in my first book, Old Texts, New Practices, Islamic Reform in Modern Morocco, I examined the way Muslims experienced and understood modern transformations by looking at a project of Islamic reform initiated by a mufti, initiated by a religious scholar, a prominent Moroccan mufti, in the pre-protectorate period, meaning I stopped my research in 1910. The French occupation of Morocco occurred in 1912. So my entire research in the pre-colonial period, a period of major crisis, of major change, as fears about a full-scale French military occupation threatened the country with social order and anarchy. So notice also not only the documents and the resources, the primary resources that I'm using, but also notice the time period that I'm choosing for this kind of research. The fatwas I analyzed focused on the expansion of contact with foreigners, okay? And here I'm bringing some documents so you can see what exactly the documents that I'm reading. This is the handwriting of my mufti, of the mufti that I studied for the first book. His name was Wazani, Al-Mahdi al-Wazani, and this is his handwriting. This is a fatwa, one of the fatwas, or one page of these documents that I'm studying. And now I will give you some examples of what I studied, what questions specifically I studied, and what I found, what were my conclusions. For example, so remember, we are talking about the pre-colonial period. I finished my study in 1910, so before military occupation, but there is already anxiety in the air. It is clear the weakness of Islamic society vis-a-vis European military and technological superiority is very clear. And the European penetration and European intervention is maybe not militarily, but in many other aspects of life. So for example, Muslims asked their muftis, and specifically my mufti, Wazani, about the legality of Muslims working for foreign powers. Muslims becoming business agents of European business companies. Muslims involved in commerce and maintaining close contacts with Christians. Most importantly, Muslims were anxious about Muslim subjects coming under the legal protection of European consulates. So here you see the choices that I'm making in choosing my resources and in choosing the questions that I'm picking for research, okay? Again, I'm thinking about modernity. I'm thinking about the transformations that occurred with the modern period, and I'm looking into understanding the Muslim side in this equation. This was an insult to the Moroccan Sultan's sovereignty. For a Muslim subject or for a subject of the Moroccan Sultan, Jew or Christian, to go and seek the protection of an European consulate was a direct insult to the Moroccan Sultan. And it transformed the relations between the Moroccan Sultan and his subjects, but it also transformed the relations among Moroccans themselves, because there were some subjects who were able to attain foreign protection. Many of them, guess what, were rich Jews, vis-a-vis those who were unable to attain protection. So you see how I'm selecting these tense moments, these charged moments to penetrate society, to penetrate my society. The Mufti rejected the practice of seeking protection of infidel and viewed it as a rebellion against the Muslim ruler and a violation of Islamic norms. I demonstrate how the new historical conditions shaped my mufti's legal responses. I show how he was engaged with modern concepts, with modern institutions from within Islamic tradition. I'll give you another example. Moroccan Muslims during this time asked my Mufti, Al-Mahdi Al-Wazani, about the permissibility of consumption of new items imported from Europe. A Moroccan trade with Europe increased during this time. New tastes for European manufactured goods emerged. New clothes, new food, new beverages circulated in Morocco, and new consumption patterns emerged. Imported and cheaper tea, sugar, cotton fabric, candles, oil, matches, glassware, pottery, tableware spread all over the country and forced out local artisans and craftsmen. Many Moroccans suffered from the competition with European goods and became hostile to the new habits and the new commodities that they viewed as a threat to Moroccan economy and Moroccan sovereignty. For example, the consumption of alcohol or the consumption of coffee were foreign to Moroccan and Islamic practice. Specifically, I discovered a series of fatwas that responded to rumors that circulated in Fez and claimed that sugar imported from Europe was refined by the aid of pig's blood. All righty. Again, that is the moment that I'm choosing to penetrate my society, okay? The Mufti argued that sugar manufactured in Europe is permissible. And I explore the social discontent that shaped the rumors and the doctrinal analysis that of the Mufti. I show how the Mufti tried to make sense of the new world in which he lived, and at the same time to give meaning to Islamic moral and legal obligations. So by focusing on a Moroccan Mufti, an avid reformer of Moroccan society, in his attempts to develop modernizing projects and new modes of knowledge and practice, I proposed a completely different argument than the essentialist paradigm. Listen to my argument. My study demonstrates that reformers supported their arguments by referring back to Islamic tradition, going back to the Quran and to other foundational texts of Islamic tradition and Islamic law. They attempted to find rationality, justification for developing new institutions and new ideas by arguing from within their own tradition. They were attempting to make persuasive arguments for the present by referring to the past and to an authoritative corpus, to authoritative scholarship within which their claims could make sense. They related Islamic knowledge, Islamic teachings, Islamic opinions to contemporary concerns, contemporary dilemmas, and attitudes of the contemporary society. In this way, they transformed and regenerated Islamic tradition and knowledge. I want you to pay attention to my title, to the title of my book, Old Texts, New Practices, okay? That connection between Islamic tradition, Islamic law, and the new practices. Again, what I love about fatwas and about what they allow me to think about is that fatwas bring Islamic legal knowledge into the world, and the world into Islamic knowledge. So this is what I did so far. I mean, and the trajectory that I took since the publication of my book continued that kind of research. In the past, I would say 3-4 years, I started a new project, and that project expands my focus into the Moroccan colonial period. So as I told you, the first project and all the articles that I published after the book, after the first book, really stopped in 1910, before the occupation. Since 2017, I am publishing and working on a new project that pushes my research into the colonial period. So I'm starting in 1912 and I'm finishing in 1956. I explore a reform initiative conceived by a distinguished Mufti, a distinguished Muslim scholar, during the period of the French protectorate, the French colonial project in Morocco. I discovered a series of fatwas about new commodities that appeared in Morocco following the French occupation. Muslims requested legal opinions on new products such as telephones, telegraphs, phonographs, European hats, capitalism, banks, paper money, interest, and insurance. So this is the focus of my new research. Again, against the impression that Muslim scholars reacted to Western ideas, reacted to Western institutions and innovations and values, I argue that the transformation of modern Islamic and Arab thought emerged within complex processes of negotiation across cultural lines. Okay, are you still alive over there? I see only dark. Are you with me? Yes, at least those that I see faces. Yes, okay. So I'll give you one example, maybe because I see that I'm running out of time. I'll give you one example, and maybe we can discuss other examples during the Q&A. So here is what I'm trying to do. One approach that I'm taking in this new research is to extend the scope of the historical and social studies by transcending the colonizer-colonized binary. So if the essentialist paradigm is claiming that every innovation and every change and every transformation that occurred in the Muslim society occurred as a response or as a reaction to Europe, I'm leaving these terms of, I'm abandoning these terms of the discourse. I refuse to allow that paradigm to control my research. And one of the approaches that I took is to turn my attention away from the binary of the colonizer-colonized. And I include instead a range of other important relations beyond the colonial state, beyond colonialism, beyond the colonial encounter. Thus, one of my central arguments is that communication and exchange within colonial Moroccan society itself and across the Mediterranean and the Arab world were as important as the rhetoric of modernization that emanated from either the colonial state or Western Europe. And one of the articles that is scheduled for publication in May in the Journal of French Politics, Culture and Society explores a reform project of girls' education in colonial Morocco. So I study girls' education in colonial Morocco through these fatwas, through these documents. And what I discovered is that the Minister of Education, I found I found a primary source in the archives. The Minister of Education in the French Protectorate, and a mufti, a religious scholar, and an avid social reformer wrote a proposal to the French authorities about girls' education in Morocco. And in it, he called for a reform in girls' education. He advocated the new French-run primary schools as replacing the informal settings of the Quranic neighborhood schools or the handicraft workshops, and espoused for a radically new concept of knowledge. But he also insisted on women's very limited access to the public sphere and buttressed gender distinctions and hierarchies. Moreover, he argued strongly against unveiling and gender desegregation and fiercely criticized gender equality. In making his arguments, this Minister of Education consciously formulated conceptions of womanhood and domesticity and articulated the identity of the modern Moroccan woman. As I said, I'm shifting my lens, I'm shifting my perspective from the binary between colonized and colonizer into new relationships that I'm exploring, other relationships that I'm exploring. My argument is that Minister of Education, that project of reform, emerged within a broader struggle among competing views over the effective way for the regeneration of the Muslim Ummah, of the Muslim nation. Specifically, I attend to debates among Moroccans themselves and tensions across the Arab world. I argue that his essay, that fatwa, that treatise that he wrote, contested on the one hand a rival Moroccan, more conservative view that considered primary schooling for girls a dangerous, reprehensible practice that would lead to the unveiling of women, and on the other hand, an alternative contemporary conception articulated by Muslim scholars and Muslim thinkers and circulated throughout the Middle East and North Africa that predicated civilizational progress on unveiling and gender desegregation. The scholar was concerned with what he viewed as Morocco's social and cultural shortcomings, and unambiguously aspired to acquire the virtues of European civilization, while at the same time he wanted to reconfigure the revitalization of Moroccan society in Arab Islamic terms. In writing his fatwas, in writing his treatise, Al-Hajwi, my guy, negotiated multiple epistemological spheres: Islamic theology, Islamic jurisprudence, contemporary Moroccan ideas, contemporary Moroccan concerns, regional Arab social thought, Orientalist and colonial arguments, and hegemonic European ideologies. I suggest that in the Moroccan context, the articulation of discourses on cultural renewal, on cultural reform, the reformulation of identities occurred in a transcultural global milieu. My analysis demonstrates that debate and exchange within colonial Moroccan society and across the Arab world were as important as relations and divisions between Europeans and Moroccans. The bottom line is that my research focuses scholarly attention on thinking about modernity as a global condition, played out in diverse regions and in the relations between them, rather than originating in Europe and then being transplanted everywhere. I approach modernity as a single but uneven global transformation with no center no single point of origin. That's me. That's it.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions for Professor Terem? Thank you for that amazing overview. And there are so many elements to your work, which are also fascinating. Does anyone?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah, Charles.
Did you find any significant geographic differences between fatwas that were issued in Casablanca or Marrakesh or Tangiers, or is it consistent throughout Morocco?
I would say that it is very consistent, and I would say that also the two muftis that I focus my research on, both of them lived in Fez, but really operated all over Morocco. So even though they were educated, trained, and lived in Fez, they received fatwas from the countryside. They received fatwas from other urban centers, from Marrakesh or Rabat. Okay, so the fact that you as a mufti lived in Fez did not require or did not limit your audience to come only from the fatwa seekers could come from all over the world. Actually, Charles, that is a very interesting question, because I am about to send for a peer review a new article about European hats. I mentioned that in my talk, and the fatwa that my mufti received arrived from Albania, not even from Morocco itself, but from Albania. Okay, so the fact that you operated in Fez or in Rabat or in Marrakesh did not limit your fatwa seekers. Okay, it was open to everyone in society. And what really shaped or impacted the number of fatwas or the quality of fatwas that you as a mufti received was really your authority, your knowledge, your reputation as a mufti in your society. So here is a mufti who lived in Fez his entire life, but received a fatwa, a request for a fatwa from an Albanian community and an Albanian mufti. Okay?
Nice. That is a good segue to one of my questions, which you're sort of starting to answer, which is how these phenomena played out in other Muslim countries and how Morocco and other countries sort of influenced one another in this.
So really, this is what I do with the second, the current project that I'm doing right now. And I'm already making my argument very clear to the community of scholars that I am completely shifting gear, right? I mean, I'm no longer, I mean, it's not only that I'm trying to debunk the essentialist paradigm. I'm trying to move away, not even to discuss, not even to accept the parameters that it imposes on everyone that is part of that conversation. And I am saying, let's turn our attention to conversations that occurred in Moroccan society itself. Let's turn our attention to conversations that occurred between Moroccans and their neighbors, other Arab countries, other Arab muftis, other rulers in the Arab world. I mean, I discovered this Albania, okay, back to the European hats. And how shall I, as a Muslim community, am I allowed, that's the question, am I allowed, is it permissible for Muslims to wear European hats, okay? The year is 1937, okay, the interwar period, before World War II, okay? And if you know anything about the Middle East, the modern Middle East, Ataturk, the father of the modern Turkish state, is reforming the country and pushing secularizing reforms on the country. Albania is very close and very inspired. Okay, the Albanian ruler, Zogu, the king of Albania, is very inspired by Ataturk and really pushing the country, Albania, into that kind or directing Albania into that kind of modernization, secular modernization. The Muslims in the country are freaking out. Okay, and my mufti, the guy that I'm studying, is completely framing his discussion as an answer to Ataturk. Okay, as a dialogue with Turkey, dialogue with Albania, dialogue with secularism. So the fact that Orientalism, that the colonial discourse, that the nationalists that came immediately after colonialism were so focused on the conversation between the colonial or the colonizer and the colonized, for me is only a disturbance, only a distraction. Look what is happening in other parts of the conversation. Pay attention to other voices, pay attention to other dialogues. And one of the most important dialogues in the interwar period were between Arabs and thinkers, religious thinkers in the Arab world in general, and Ataturk and his reform project. Not at all with Europe. So I think that what I'm trying to do is really to shift the conversation completely. And I cannot, and I will not, and I don't claim that the colonial encounter was not important. Obviously, it was important. It is essential. And Lydia can attest that I'm teaching colonialism big time in my classes, okay? So obviously it is important, but it is not, this is my argument, it is not the only important element. And it is not the only drive for transformation and change. And it's about time to open the lens and open the conversation to include the local society itself and the region, the Muslim world, the Arab world, North Africa, the Mediterranean. Okay.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Feel free to post in the chat. The one came to me in the chat. So it seems clear that the essentialist paradigms are in service of political or ideological agendas. Mm-hmm. What significance does this reevaluation have beyond the historical?
That's an excellent question. Who asked it?
That's from Professor Mark Kaplowitz.
Excellent, Mark. Really good question. And obviously you understand where I'm going with it in terms of the larger project. And it is about, and I think I mentioned it at the beginning of my presentation here. I mean, the fact that Islam in general and Islamic tradition is not understood to this day on its own terms. I mean, the modern and changes and transformation and the path to modernity and modernization, the shape of modernization, is judged in how much it is similar to Europe, how close it is to the European path. And it makes statements about Islamic society and about Islamic ideas essentialists. And it is time to change the conversation and judge or evaluate or study Islamic society on its own terms, understanding its arguments, understanding its logic, its reasoning. I would say that part of the problem, at least for scholars, is the need to know and master, obviously, several languages. And that requires a very long training and a very specific training. Clearly, to master, at least in my case, Arabic and French requires years of training, and not everyone can or has an access to that kind of training. I can tell you that I started Arabic. I started training in Arabic in my bachelor degree at Tel Aviv University. So my master's degree was a continuation in Arabic training, and my PhD degree brought obviously major training in Arabic. But this is a decision that I made earlier on when I was very young, and I don't know how easy it is, you know, in the middle of your career, and maybe especially when you are a professor already and have your commitments to your college and your university, to start training in Arabic. This is a rich language, difficult language. All my research is done in the archives. This is another layer of difficulty. It's not only the money to allow me these travels to Morocco, or before Morocco it was Egypt. It's not only that, it's also the commitment to do work in the archives. It's a very complicated process. You go to the Middle East and you go to the archives, and you have a month of research in the National Archive in Rabat, but you don't know what you are going to find in the National Archives in Rabat. And sometimes I found nothing, and I came back with basically not much. This is not fun, I should say. So there are difficulties in the path that I chose, but there is also a political statement behind what I'm saying. Yeah.
Nice, great.
Thank you for this question.
Yeah. This might be a good time to segue for you to talk a little bit about JIMES and the work you do, not just with your research, but teaching, and kind of how this trickles down to the students that you work with as well.
Oh, we have Lydia here. Yes. We can put her on the spot.
I love
it. Okay, JIMES is an exciting project that I co-founded. I know some of you know my colleagues, Jonathan Judekan in the history department, and Essen Kirdish in the international studies department. And the three of us created this unique program that brings together Jewish, Islamic, and Middle East studies. That is the first program in the nation that brings together Jewish studies and Islamic studies under the same umbrella in the liberal arts level. There is one more program in the entire United States of America that teaches that in that way, but it is in a research university in WashU. And this is in the research level, okay, in the research university level. So basically, Rhodes offers a program that is very unique to Rhodes, and it is unique. It is unique because I think of the personalities, and because of the that connection that we have among us. that we decided to make it, to bring together the entanglements between Jewish studies and Islamic studies, highlight the Middle East as a place for these entanglements. You can guess that I'm teaching Israel-Palestine conflict. So the idea is really to demonstrate continuities, demonstrate coexistence, similarities, but also at the same time to discuss difficult topics like conflicts and wars. And as I said, I'm teaching the Israel-Palestine conflict. That's not an easy topic, not an easy class. But this is what we do, and we are super excited about it, and I'm super excited about it, and I'm the chair of the program, and Lydia is a student graduating very soon from the program. Lydia, what do you think about the program?
Yeah, I love it, honestly. So when did you, it was introduced pretty recently, and I was very excited to get to be a part of this. And I think it's been really interesting for me learning about Jewish, Islamic, and Middle Eastern studies in that way, like of having kind of everything connected. And it's been a really interesting lens through which like learn about my own Judaism in a sense. And I actually studied abroad in Morocco. And it was there that I did a lot of research on Moroccan Jewish identity, which really like kickstarted my interest in like my own Jewish identity. So it's definitely, I mean, like I have so many great things to say about this program and my experiences, and Professor Terem and every single professor she just mentioned, because I've taken classes with all of them and they're great. So yes.
Yeah, and we are going to prohibit your graduation. You know that. No graduation for Lydia.
I like that idea too. We got a question in the chat about if Jimes has created opportunities for Jewish and Muslim students to get to know each other and develop meaningful relationships. And I know when we were speaking before everyone joined that it was really kicked off in January, I think, of last year. And then I'm sure COVID has kind of changed course a little bit.
Yeah.
Tell us about that kind of student to student connection.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was our bad luck. I mean, it was a global bad luck, COVID. But I would say that COVID changed a little bit the dynamic. I mean, we were able to launch and have a big party, like the opening, the launch party of the program, and then COVID hit. But through our classes, I can say, through our classes, that connection between Muslims and Jews, between American students, not Muslims and Jews, Christians, also we have that connection in the classes. But this is not the only goal, okay? The goal is also to try outside of the class, outside of classes, to develop dynamics, to develop, to encourage conversations, tough conversations. We bring guest speakers almost every semester. Maybe only the first semester of COVID, we were too shocked to engage, to be engaged in any conversation with outsiders. But since the beginning of this academic year, we've been bringing guests from the outside, Muslims, Jews, Palestinians, Israelis, to have difficult conversations with all of us. But as far as this year is concerned, all these conversations and all these contacts occur within classes. I hope that once we return to campus, fully return to campus, not in a hybrid style, I hope to start what we are really all about, and having these kind of contacts and exchanges, fun and difficult, outside of the classes too.
Nice, thank you. I know we're all looking forward to that. And in the meantime, we're thrilled to be able to engage with some of the academic material that you bring to the table in settings like this. So thank you again so much for partnering with us on this and your continued partnership with Hillel in general. In our last moments, I would love to explain what our next lecture will be all about. And it's actually the last lecture of the series this semester in this school year, with Professor Terem's colleague, Professor Jonathan Judakin. He will be joining us on Friday, April 2nd from 12 to 1, right back here on Zoom. And he'll be talking about Albert Memmi, the most important Jewish thinker of the 20th century you've never heard of before. So that will be a fascinating way to close out our semester and close out our school year. And again, Professor Terem, thank you so much for your involvement and participation and partnership. And thank you to all of you in the audience who have tuned in and brought your thinking caps and your great questions to the conversation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the excellent questions. Hope to see you one day in person.
I'm willing in person soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.